Tonight, a dramatic shift is unfolding in Latin America that could reshape Venezuela's political future. Reports indicate that Moscow's long-standing strategic land bridge into Venezuela, its logistical, financial, and political lifeline, is breaking apart. And as that support weakens, something extraordinary is happening on the streets. Millions of Venezuelans are expressing renewed hope, believing the regime may finally be standing on the edge of collapse. For years, Moscow's strategic support system functioned as one of the most vital lifelines, keeping Venezuela's government afloat amid sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and deep economic crisis. But that structure is now visibly weakening, and the implications are profound. This support went far beyond public statements of solidarity. It included financial mechanisms that helped Caracas bypass restrictions, energy cooperation that sustained oil production, military and security coordination that reinforced internal control, and diplomatic backing that shielded the regime in international forums. The hook is simple but striking. When a regime loses its strongest external guarantor, the ground beneath it starts to shift fast. Russia's own mounting geopolitical pressures, economic strain, and global isolation have reduced its capacity and willingness to maintain the same level of engagement in Venezuela, turning what was once a solid bridge into a fragile and unreliable link. Insiders note that delayed financial flows, reduced technical assistance, and a quieter diplomatic posture are already being felt within Venezuela's governing circles. This is not just a symbolic setback. It directly undermines the regime's ability to project stability at home and confidence abroad. Another critical hook lies in perception. Power in politics often depends on belief, and the belief that Moscow would always stand behind Caracas is fading. As that perception erodes, so does the regime's deterrence against internal dissent and elite defection. Officials who once relied on Russian backing as a safety net are now forced to confront uncomfortable questions about sustainability. Internationally, the weakening of this alliance changes the calculus for other actors, who may now see less risk in increasing pressure or pushing for political change. Economically, the loss of alternative financial channels tightens the squeeze on an already struggling system, making it harder to manage imports, currency stability, and energy operations. The most compelling hook of all is timing. This shift is happening as Venezuelan society remains under immense strain, meaning even small disruptions can have outsized political effects. In political terms, Moscow's retreat removes a pillar that helped the regime weather storms for years. Without that external anchor, the government faces a harsher reality, standing more exposed, more isolated, and more vulnerable than at any point in recent memory, with every move now watched closely by citizens, rivals, and the international community alike. The weakening of Russia's backing has ignited a noticeable surge of optimism across Venezuela, creating a rare psychological shift in a society long conditioned to expect political stalemate and disappointment. For many citizens, this moment feels different, and that feeling itself has become a powerful political force. The hook lies in perception. When people begin to believe that a once untouchable system can actually bend or break, fear starts to lose its grip. In neighborhoods, workplaces, and online spaces, conversations are changing tone, moving from quiet resignation to cautious anticipation. Opposition figures are framing the erosion of external support as proof that the regime's international shield is no longer guaranteed, encouraging supporters to stay alert and organized rather than withdrawn and silent. This renewed optimism is not rooted in sudden economic relief or sweeping reforms, but in the belief that the balance of power is subtly shifting. Political analysts note that authoritarian systems often rely as much on public psychology as on security forces, and cracks in confidence can be just as destabilizing as material shortages. The idea spreading among Venezuelans is simple yet potent. If the government can no longer rely on a powerful ally to absorb pressure, its ability to suppress dissent may weaken. That belief is acting as a catalyst, re-energizing civil society networks, activists, and community organizers who have endured years of setbacks. The hook intensifies here. Hope, once awakened, is difficult to contain. Social media has amplified this mood dramatically, turning geopolitical developments into symbols of possible change. Images, slogans, and commentary reflecting celebration or renewed resolve are circulating widely, signaling a collective emotional release. Even those who remain skeptical admit that the atmosphere feels unusually charged. For the regime, this presents a quiet but serious challenge because optimism reduces the effectiveness of intimidation and undermines narratives of inevitability. When citizens sense vulnerability at the top, they become more willing to question authority and less willing to accept hardship as permanent. Importantly, this surge of optimism also affects political elites and institutions. As public sentiment shifts, so does the risk calculus for insiders who depend on social stability to protect their positions. The hook here is subtle but critical. Popular confidence can accelerate elite doubt. In Venezuela's case, the growing belief that external protection is fading may encourage cautious distancing, hedging, or silence among those who once projected unwavering loyalty. In political terms, this change in mood does not guarantee immediate transformation, but it alters the terrain. Optimism, once scarce, is now circulating widely, and in a deeply strained society that alone has the power to unsettle the status quo. Without strong external assistance, Venezuela's government is confronting a set of constraints that strike at the core of its ability to govern, and this is where pressure shifts from abstract geopolitics to daily survival. Analysts warn that reduced foreign support could sharply limit access to fuel supplies, spare parts, and technical expertise essential for maintaining basic services. The hook is immediate and relatable. When fuel stops moving, everything stops. Transportation, food distribution, electricity generation, and even security operations depend on reliable energy flows, and any disruption quickly ripples through society. In a system already stretched thin, the loss of external buffers transforms manageable stress into systemic risk. Financial strain is another critical pressure point. External backing previously helped soften the impact of sanctions by enabling alternative payment channels and trade mechanisms. As these pathways narrow, the government faces shrinking options to finance imports of food, medicine, and industrial inputs. The hook here is economic reality. Without liquidity, authority weakens. Inflationary pressure, currency instability, and delayed payments can fuel public frustration and erode trust in institutions that are already viewed with skepticism. Even small shortages can become politically explosive when confidence is low and expectations are fragile. Internal security, often portrayed as the regime's strongest pillar, is also vulnerable to these constraints. Security forces rely on consistent funding, equipment maintenance, and logistical coordination. Reduced resources can affect morale, readiness, and cohesion, especially if personnel sense that political leadership is losing its international backing. The hook sharpens. Loyalty is easiest to maintain when the system appears durable. As constraints grow, cracks can emerge quietly within the ranks, not necessarily through open rebellion, but through hesitation, inefficiency, or selective enforcement. Administrative capacity is another overlooked but crucial area. Governing a complex country requires functioning bureaucracies, data systems, and coordination across ministries. External technical support once helped compensate for domestic institutional decay. As that support fades, inefficiencies multiply, delays increase, and policy execution becomes uneven. This creates a feedback loop in which governance failures deepen public dissatisfaction, further amplifying pressure on leadership. What makes this moment particularly volatile is timing. These constraints are converging at a point when Venezuelan society is already fatigued by prolonged hardship. The hook lies in accumulation. No single shortage or delay collapses a system, but combined pressures can overwhelm it. Analysts emphasize that regimes often falter not from one decisive blow, but from the slow erosion of capacity. In Venezuela's case, the diminishing ability to manage fuel, imports, and security could quietly but decisively tilt the balance, turning chronic strain into an acute political challenge. As external guarantees weaken, the internal power dynamics of Venezuela are entering a more uncertain and potentially volatile phase where loyalty is no longer automatic and silence can be as telling as defiance. Political elites and senior officials have long operated under the assumption that strong international backing would insulate the system from collapse, providing reassurance that alignment with the ruling structure was the safest option. The hook emerges here. When protection fades, calculation replaces conviction. The gradual erosion of Russia's support is forcing insiders to reassess not ideology, but risk. Within elite circles, conversations are shifting from confidence to contingency. Business. Linked power brokers, senior bureaucrats, and regional officials are increasingly focused on preserving personal security, assets, and future relevance. This change may not manifest through public resignations or dramatic statements, but through subtle behavioral shifts, reduced visibility, delayed decisions, and cautious distancing from controversial policies. The hook is psychological. Elites do not need to openly defect to weaken a regime. Hesitation alone can slow governance and expose fragility. The military and security establishment, often viewed as the ultimate pillar of regime stability, is also part of this recalculation. Loyalty within these institutions is sustained not only by ideology or command structure, but by confidence in continuity. When international backing appears uncertain, that confidence can erode. Officers may begin to question whether unconditional loyalty remains the safest path, particularly if resources tighten and public discontent grows. The hook sharpens here. Fractures rarely begin at the top. They often spread quietly through mid-level ranks where operational decisions are made. Another critical dimension is factionalism. As external support diminishes, internal competition for influence and resources can intensify. Different power centers may position themselves as indispensable, blame rivals for failures, or quietly undermine one another to survive a potential transition. This infighting does not need to be visible to be damaging. It can paralyze decision making, weaken coordination, and amplify mistrust within the ruling structure. For a system reliant on centralized control, such fragmentation is deeply destabilizing. Public perception magnifies these internal shifts. Citizens are highly attuned to signs of elite uncertainty, interpreting hesitation as weakness. The hook here is exposure. Once the image of unity cracks, it becomes difficult to restore. Rumors, leaks, and selective messaging can spread rapidly, further pressuring insiders to protect themselves rather than defend the system. In political terms, this moment represents a tipping point where elite doubt can accelerate broader instability. As loyalties are quietly reassessed and alliances become conditional, the regime faces not just external pressure, but the far more dangerous prospect of erosion from within. As signs of weakening external support emerge, regional governments and global stakeholders are closely recalibrating their strategies toward Venezuela, aware that moments of uncertainty often open narrow but consequential diplomatic windows. The hook here is anticipation. When power appears to wobble, everyone starts moving their pieces. Countries that once adopted cautious or neutral positions are reassessing the risks and rewards of engagement, pressure, or mediation. For years, the resilience of Venezuela's leadership discouraged bold initiatives, but a shifting balance is changing how capitals across the region interpret opportunity and leverage. In Latin America, neighboring states are watching developments with heightened attention, not only for political reasons but for practical ones tied to migration, trade, and border security. Any indication of transition or instability could trigger population movements or economic disruption, prompting governments to prepare contingency plans. The hook is regional consequence. Venezuela's political trajectory does not stay contained within its borders. Diplomatic channels that were previously dormant are being quietly reactivated, with officials exploring whether conditions may soon favor dialogue, coordinated pressure, or renewed multilateral involvement. At the international level, major powers and institutions are also adjusting their tone. A weakening regime backed by fewer external allies changes the diplomatic cost-benefit analysis. Sanctions policies, recognition frameworks, and negotiation strategies are all being re-examined in light of a potential opening. The hook lies in time. Acting too early risks strengthening hardliners, while acting too late risks missing the moment entirely. This delicate balance is driving behind the scenes coordination as stakeholders seek to avoid unilateral moves that could backfire. Global financial and humanitarian actors are another critical piece of this recalculation. If Venezuela is approaching a transition phase, questions arise about debt restructuring, energy market reintegration, and humanitarian access. Institutions that once held back due to political uncertainty are now quietly assessing scenarios for engagement. The hook here is preparedness. Transitions are chaotic when plans are absent and costly when coordination fails. Early positioning allows actors to influence outcomes rather than react to them. What makes this recalibration especially significant is the message it sends internally. Venezuelan elites and citizens alike pay close attention to international signals. Shifts in diplomatic language, increased activity from foreign envoys, or renewed multilateral discussions can reinforce perceptions that change is possible. The hook becomes self-reinforcing. External interest fuels internal expectation. In political terms, the growing sense that the world is watching and preparing alters the environment in which decisions are made, increasing pressure on the regime while widening the space for alternative political pathways to emerge. Despite the persistent uncertainty surrounding Venezuela's political future, the collapse of a key external land bridge has already altered the balance in ways that are difficult to reverse, and this shift is reshaping both the national mood and the international narrative. The hook lies in contrast. For years, the story of Venezuela was one of endurance against pressure, but now the storyline is changing to one of exposure and vulnerability. Even without immediate political transformation, the psychological and strategic environment has been fundamentally redefined. Citizens who once felt isolated now sense that the regime stands more alone than ever before, and that perception itself is a form of power. Inside the country, this altered balance is reframing expectations. Public discourse is no longer centered solely on survival, but increasingly on possibility. That does not mean optimism is naive or uniform. Skepticism remains strong, yet the hook is momentum. Once expectations shift, they are difficult to contain. Conversations that were previously whispered are now held more openly, and civic engagement, even in small forms, carries new symbolic weight. The regime, aware of this change in tone, faces a more complex challenge. Controlling material conditions is one thing, but managing hope is far more difficult. Internationally, the narrative shift is just as significant. Venezuela is no longer viewed simply as a frozen crisis, but as a situation in motion. This reframing affects media coverage, diplomatic engagement, and strategic planning. The hook here is attention. When a country moves from stagnation to potential transition, it draws eyes, influence, and competing agendas. Global actors begin shaping messages not just for governments, but for populations, signaling readiness for new outcomes without committing to specific ones. This ambiguity keeps pressure high while options remain open. The redistribution of leverage is subtle but meaningful. A government that once relied on the certainty of external backing must now operate under greater scrutiny, while opposition forces and civil society find their narratives resonating more widely. The hook sharpens around credibility. Confidence is no longer monopolized by those in power. Each policy decision, each public appearance, is measured against the growing belief that the system is more fragile than it appears. What makes this moment especially consequential is that change does not need to be immediate to be decisive. Political systems often unravel through accumulated shifts rather than dramatic breaks. The loss of a critical external anchor has already tilted the field, injecting renewed hope among millions and signaling to the world that Venezuela's trajectory is no longer fixed. In political terms, the balance has moved, the narrative has turned, and the space for outcomes once considered unthinkable is quietly expanding. As the night unfolds, one thing is clear: the collapse of Moscow's Venezuela land bridge has sent shockwaves through the country. Whether this moment becomes a turning point or a missed opportunity remains uncertain. But for millions of Venezuelans, hope has re-entered the conversation. And in a nation starved of good news, that may be the most powerful development of all.